Chapter 13 continued. I'm reading from Arcana Celestia 9272. All things which relate to a field, to seed time, and to the produce of a field, signify such states of mind as belong to the Church in general, and in particular to every member of the Church, whom the Lord regenerates by the truths of faith and by the goodness of love. He who is ignorant of the state of heaven believes no other but that these expressions in the word are mere metaphorical sayings and comparisons, and yet they are real correspondencies. For when angels converse together about man's regeneration, and on such occasions fields sown or fallow, and also harvests, appear in the world of spirits beneath, and this in consequence of the state and the form of the corresponding together. He who knows this may also know that in the natural world such objects are created according to correspondencies. For the whole of nature, comprehending the sky with the sun, the moon and the stars, the earth with the subjects of its three kingdoms, correspond to such states of mind as are in the spiritual world. From Arcana Celestia 3483. Whenever in the universe any object appears, it is a representative of the Lord's kingdom, so much so that there is actually nothing in the atmospheric and starry universe, nothing in the earth and its three kingdoms, which does not after its own manner represent. For in nature the whole and every part of the whole are ultimate images. From the divine essence are celestial states of goodness, and from these spiritual states of truth, and from both of them conjointly natural objects. This will show how gross, indeed how earthly, and even how inverted must human intelligence be, which attributes everything to nature separated, or apart from an influx precedent to itself, or apart from its efficient cause. They too, who so think and speak, are in their own eyes far wiser than others in thus attributing all things to nature. Angelic intelligence, on the contrary, attributes nothing to nature, but all things collectively, as well as singly, to the Lord's divine essence, and thus to life, and not to anything dead. The learned know that subsistence is a perpetual existence, and yet it is contrary to the affection for falsehood, and therefore opposed to the reputation for learning, for them to admit that nature subsists, just as it came forth from existence from the Lord's divine essence. Now because all things, collectively as well as singly, subsist from the divine essence, that is, they continually exist from him, and as all derivatives must of necessity represent those states of life through which they become extant, therefore it follows that the visible universe is nothing else than a theatre which represents the Lord's kingdom, and this latter a theatre representing the Lord himself. From Arcana Celestia 1632. I have conversed with angels concerning representatives, as for instance that there is nothing in the vegetable kingdom upon earth which does not in some manner represent the kingdom of the Lord. And they said that all the beautiful and graceful forms of the vegetable world derive their origin through heaven from the Lord. And when his celestial and spiritual states of life inflow into nature or into the natural mind, such objects are actually exhibited, which is the source of the vegetative soul or life. This is the ground of representatives. From Arcana Celestia 2999. There is not anything in the natural created world but what corresponds to those states of mind which are in the spiritual world, and which in this way, after its manner, represent something in the Lord's kingdom. From this source are both the existence of all things and their subsistence also. Did man but know how things are constituted, never would he, as he is wont to do, attribute all things to nature. From Arcana Celestia 10057. All things in the natural world correspond to those states of life which are in the spiritual world, for this reason that the former exist and subsist from the latter. It is known that such objects are seen with the eyes and heard with the ears. Man perceives inwardly, and that they pass, as it were, from the world through the eyes and ears into the thought, and so into the intellect, for thought is an act of the intellect. And if the objects be love, that they pass through the intellect into the will, and afterwards from the will by way of the intellect into oral speech and bodily action. Such is the circle of things from the world through the natural man into the spiritual, and from the spiritual man again into the world. But it should be known that this circle commences from the will, which is the inmost faculty of man's life, as its foundation. There it begins and thence proceeds, and although it appears otherwise, the Lord rules from heaven the will of that man who is in a good state of life. For then is an influx from the spiritual world into the natural, thus through the internal man into the external, and not contrariwise, for the internal man is in heaven, but the external in the world. And from Arcana Celestia 10126. The word of God in the letter consists of the representation of celestial and spiritual states of mind, which are states of heaven and of the church, and therefore they signify those states in the internal sense. The word of God may on this account be called heaven, as it were in the ultimate states of life. For in those ultimate states of heaven, all things which are seen and heard are the representative forms of such things as are thought of and spoken by the angels of the higher heavens, all of which relate to truths of faith and to good states of love. The cause of these representative forms being in the ultimate states of heaven is that they who are in such ultimate states of life are not able to comprehend the interior truths of angelic wisdom, but only such forms as represent them. It is also in accordance with divine order that when higher states of life pass down into the lower, they are turned into like objects, and so are presented before the outward senses, and are in this manner accommodated to their respective comprehensions. For this reason the word in ultimate states of life, that is, in the sense of the letter, represents and thence signifies the celestial and spiritual mental states of the superior heavens, and is presented in a way accommodated to the capacity of man, serving at the same time as a basis and a foundation for the heavens. From Arcana Celestia 10185. The walls of a house signify interior states of the mind, because in the human form the breast and sides have a like signification. For all the representative forms of nature bear some relation to the human form, and according to their relation to that form, such is their signification. A house, as to its higher part or roof, has a like signification with the head. The interior parts, which are beneath the highest, have a like signification with the breast and sides, and its foundation with the feet and soles. It is so because the universal heaven bears a relation to one man, and there is an influx from this into universal nature. For the natural world exists and subsists from the spiritual world. When it is said the spiritual world, the Lord's essence in that world is meant. That all things in nature bear some relation to the human form is evident from every form in the vegetable kingdom, for in that kingdom they are all clothed with leaves and bear flowers before the fruit is produced, the fruit being the ultimate end, for the sake of all which their former products are brought into existence, and to which they are all directed. For the leaves stand in relation to the lungs, and are instead of respiration, for by their means the juice is drawn upwards. Therefore a tree stripped of its leaves can bear no fruit. Hence leaves, when they are mentioned in the word, signify the truths which belong to faith. For these in like manner excite that living state in man by which goodness is produced. The efflorescence before the fruit corresponds to the state in that time of man's life when the natural mind is occupied with marriage and filled with its joys, and therefore it corresponds to the state when truth is conjoining with good. But the fruit corresponds to goodness itself, which, so far as it ripens like fruit, exhibits itself in works, and therefore fruits in the word signify the works of charity. And the spiritual efflorescence before the fruit is compared to the voice and joy of the bride and bridegroom. He therefore who wisely reflects on these things will very clearly discern that the heavenly paradise is represented in an earthly paradise, and that for the same reason all things in nature bear a relation to such states of the mind as are in the spiritual world. And if he can proceed to a still more remote conclusion, he will perceive that nature is not subsistent, but subsists by an influx from heaven, that is, from the divine essence in heaven, so entirely so that if the communication were cut off, all the objects of the earth would be annihilated. And from Arcana Celestia 10199. An odour signifies a perceptive state of the mind, and hence a sweet odour signifies an agreeable state of perception. For all those qualities which man perceives by the organs of the senses, as smell, taste, sight, hearing, and touch, signify those spiritual states of the mind which relate to the goodness of love and to the truths of faith. From this it is that the sensation of smell signifies a perception of interior truth from the goodness of love. Taste, the perception of an affection for knowing and being wise. Sight, the understanding of the truths of faith. Hearing, a state of perception from the goodness of faith and from obedience. And touch, in general, mental communication, transference, and reception. The cause of these significations is that as all external sensations derive their origin from the internal sensations which belong to the intellect and will, in man they derive their origin from the truths of faith and from the goodness of love, for these constitute the intellectual and voluntary state of man. Not that these internal sensations, which properly belong to the intellect and will, have the same faculty of outward perception as the external have, but in the course of their influx they are turned into such sensations. For all things of which man is sensuously cognizant by the organs of his external senses inflow from his internal faculties into his external, and not contrariwise. For there is no such thing as physical influx or an influx from the natural world into the spiritual, but the influx is from the spiritual world into the natural. The interior states of man, which are properly those of his intellect and his will, are in the spiritual world, and his external states, which are those of the bodily senses, are in the natural world. This will serve to show what correspondence is and how it is constituted. From Arcana Celestia 10196. The whole of nature is a theatre representing the Lord's kingdom, and is a theatre which does so represent because the natural world becomes extant and is perpetually existing, that is, subsisting through the spiritual world from the divine essence. And from Arcana Celestia 10200. In heaven there is a continual succession in their states of love and of intellectual light, that is, in their states of goodness and of truth, just like the succession of morning, noon, evening, and day dawn, and of spring, summer, autumn, and winter upon the earth. This has been frequently pointed out, and that the origin of the times of day and of the seasons of the year is from those states of mind. For all things which exist in the world are representative images of those things, that is, of those states of love and intellectual light, which are in the heavens, because the whole natural state of life exists from the spiritual state. that is from the divine essence in the heavens. And lastly, from Arcana Celestia 6948. The divine truth which goes forth from the Lord inflows into every man through the interior states of his mind, into his exterior, and even into his outward sentient and bodily faculties, and everywhere calls forth corresponding objects in their order. In the sentient faculty, such corresponding objects as appear in the world and upon earth. It is a fallacy to suppose that the objects of the senses inflow into the interior faculties, for the truth is, the external state of life does not flow into the internal, but the internal into the external.